He sued his ex-wife to escape child support? Then the judge asks one question. The moment the judge looked down at the file, the room already felt off. The man who filed the lawsuit came prepared to win. He walked in confident, clean-cut, dressed like someone who wanted to look responsible. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't unsure. He had the energy of someone who believed the system was finally going to work in his favor. He had already decided how this would end. Across the room sat his ex-wife. She didn't bring boxes of documents. She didn't bring an audience. She looked tired, not weak, just worn down in a way that comes from years of dealing with the same person. She kept her posture calm, her hands folded, her eyes forward. Not defensive. This wasn't her first time in court with him. But this time felt different. Because this time, he wasn't just trying to reduce child support. He was trying to erase it. The lawsuit claimed she was secretly wealthy. That she had hidden income. That she had misled the court during their divorce. That she was living a comfortable life while he was being forced to pay support he didn't owe. He wanted the judge to believe he had been played. And he came armed to prove it. The judge hadn't said much yet. Still reading. Still scanning. Still letting the silence stretch just enough to make everyone uncomfortable. The man watched closely, like a gambler watching the dealer shuffle cards. He was sure the odds were in his favor. He had spent months gathering material. Screenshots pulled from social media. Old emails. Business pages. Bank transfers taken out of context. Photos meant to suggest luxury. Receipts meant to suggest income streams. He believed he had found a loophole. And he believed his ex-wife was about to be exposed. This case didn't come out of nowhere. It started years earlier, back when they were still married. They met young. Suburban Midwest. Nothing dramatic about the beginning. Same social circle, same routines, same expectations. He worked a steady job. She worked too, but she always had side projects. Small ideas. Creative things. Stuff he never took seriously. He liked predictability. She liked experimenting. That difference didn't seem like a problem at first. It only became one after their child was born. Parenthood changed everything. Time got tighter. Stress got heavier. Money conversations stopped being casual and started becoming sharp. He wanted everything clean and measurable. She wanted flexibility. He wanted guarantees. She wanted room to try. During late nights, while their child slept, she worked on something of her own. Not a hobby, but not yet a business either. She researched, built systems, tested ideas. Some failed. Some almost worked. None made money right away. He didn't hide his opinion. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just dismissed it. He referred to her project as pointless. He told friends it was a distraction. He joked about it during family gatherings. He said it wasn't real work. That it didn't contribute. That it wouldn't go anywhere. Eventually, those comments piled up. When the marriage ended, the project came up during divorce discussions. She listed it honestly. Explained what it was. Explained that it hadn't earned anything yet. There was no income to divide. No valuation. Nothing to argue over. He agreed. He signed papers stating it had no financial value. That detail would matter later. At the time, the divorce settled like most do. Not friendly, but not explosive. Shared custody. Child support based on income. Standard calculations. He wasn't happy about paying, but he accepted it as part of the deal. Or so it seemed. After the divorce, she didn't stop working on the project. She had more time now. Less criticism. Fewer interruptions. She focused. She refined. She pivoted. She failed again. Then adjusted. Then tried again. It didn't happen fast. Years passed before anything changed. When the money finally came, it didn't arrive as a jackpot. It came slowly. Inconsistent at first. Then steady. Then enough to matter. She didn't post about it much. She didn't brag. She didn't announce it to the world. But she didn't hide either. She paid taxes. She reported income. She followed the rules. Her life improved quietly. Better apartment. Reliable car. Less stress about groceries. The kind of upgrades that don't look flashy but feel huge when you've struggled. Their child noticed before anyone else. Less tension at home. More stability. Fewer conversations about money overheard through thin walls. The ex-husband noticed too. At first, it was curiosity, then suspicion, then resentment. He started paying closer attention to her social media. Not obsessively, but enough. He noticed the background of photos. A newer couch. A vacation picture that wasn't extravagant but wasn't cheap either. A comment from someone congratulating her on a business milestone. That's when the idea took root. If she had money now, maybe she always had. If she was doing well, maybe she had lied before. And if she had lied, then maybe he didn't owe what he was paying. He convinced himself of this narrative quickly. It felt fair in his head. He wasn't trying to avoid responsibility, at least not how he saw it. He believed he was correcting an injustice. He believed the court had been misled. He believed the system owed him a refund. And he believed he could prove it. He contacted a lawyer who saw an opportunity. Not a guaranteed win, but a case that could be pushed. Enough circumstantial evidence. Enough room for doubt. Enough paperwork to overwhelm the other side. They framed it as fraud. They framed it as deception. They framed it as him being taken advantage of. He liked that framing. It made him the victim. So he filed the lawsuit. The filing alone rattled her. Not because she had something to hide, but because she knew what he was capable of. He liked control. He liked pressure. He liked forcing situations where others had to respond on his terms. Still, she didn't panic. She gathered records. Not aggressively. Just thoroughly. She didn't over-prepare. She trusted the facts. The weeks leading up to court were tense. He continued building his case. Printing screenshots. Highlighting numbers. Organizing timelines that looked convincing if you didn't know the full story. He told friends he was finally going to stop paying. He spoke like it was already decided. Like the judge was just a formality. By the time court day arrived, he was energized. She was calm. The judge began reviewing the materials. Page after page. Receipts from recent years. Photos dated after the divorce. Bank deposits that appeared sudden if you ignored the timeline. Screenshots of her website taken out of context. The man watched for reactions. Any sign of doubt. Any raised eyebrow. Any pause. The judge remained neutral. Then came the explanations. Still no speaking directly to each other. Everything filtered through procedure. The man's argument was clear. She had income now. Therefore, she must have had income before. Therefore, child support should be reduced or eliminated. Possibly refunded. He wanted the court to believe this wasn't new success, but hidden success. He wanted the judge to see intention. The judge asked for clarification on dates. Documents moved back and forth. The room stayed quiet, but not comfortable. She stayed composed. No dramatic gestures. No visible frustration. Just patience. Because she knew something he didn't. He had built his case on the assumption that the project existed in secret. But it never had. It existed openly, during the marriage, during the divorce, and after. And he had acknowledged it himself. The judge continued reviewing. Then came the pause. Not a long one. Just enough to signal a shift. The judge looked back at earlier filings from the divorce. Old records. Old statements. Old signatures. The man didn't notice right away. He was still confident. Still certain. Still convinced this was heading exactly where he wanted. But the air in the room changed. Hello friends, before we continue this story, we would love to know where you're watching from. Tell us so we can give you a special hug in our next video. Like, comment and subscribe. The judge leaned forward slightly, eyes moving between documents that weren't meant to be connected this way. That's when the judge asked a single question. No raised voice. No accusation. Just a basic clarification request. The kind of question that sounds harmless unless you understand what it connects. The room went still. And the man realized too late that he had just stepped into his own trap. The question didn't sound dangerous at first. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't even emotional. It was procedural, the kind of thing judges ask to confirm timelines and intent. But it forced two documents to sit next to each other in a way they hadn't before. The judge wanted clarity on when the project began and whether it existed during the marriage. That was it. Just a date range. Just confirmation. The ex-husband barely reacted. He assumed the answer would help him. In his mind, this was the final step before everything fell into place. He believed the project appeared after the divorce and that any claim otherwise would sound like a cover story. What he didn't realize was that the court already had the answer. It was in the divorce file. The judge flipped back several pages, reviewing documents that hadn't been part of the new filing but were still part of the legal record. Old disclosures. Asset lists. Statements signed under penalty of perjury. The project was there. Not hidden. Not vague. Listed plainly. Described as an early-stage venture with no revenue. The judge compared that to the current lawsuit. The man had claimed he only recently discovered the project. That he had been unaware. That it was concealed from him during the marriage and divorce. Those two claims couldn't both be true. The room stayed quiet, but the energy shifted. The judge continued reviewing without looking up. Page turns sounded louder than before. The kind of sound that makes people sit up without knowing why. The ex-wife didn't change her posture. She didn't look relieved. She didn't look smug. She had been expecting this moment since the lawsuit was filed. Not because she wanted him to fail, but because the truth had a habit of showing up when paperwork got involved. The man began adjusting in his chair. Small movements. Nothing obvious. A shift of weight. A longer blink. The confidence he walked in with didn't disappear, but it thinned. The judge moved on to the financial exhibits he had submitted. Screenshots of payments. Photos of equipment. Screenshots of website traffic. Notes highlighting revenue totals without context. Individually, they looked impressive. Together, they raised a different question. If the project had no value during the divorce, and income only appeared years later, then this wasn't hidden money. It was growth. That distinction mattered. The judge traced the timeline carefully. Dates lined up in a way that didn't support the lawsuit's claims. Income appeared long after the marriage ended. The structure of the business had changed. New contracts. New systems. New partners. Nothing suggested secret earnings during the marriage. But the bigger issue wasn't whether the project became successful later. It was that the ex-husband had acknowledged it earlier. The judge returned to the divorce agreement. The signature stood out now. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. The man had agreed in writing that the project had no value at the time. That agreement carried weight. The judge paused again, this time longer. Still no commentary. Still no judgment spoken aloud. Just silence filled with meaning. The man's lawyer began organizing papers, slower than before. The rhythm of preparation shifted. This was no longer about presentation. It was about damage control. The lawsuit had been framed as a discovery of deception. But the evidence suggested awareness. And awareness changed everything. If the man knew about the project during the marriage and signed documents stating it had no value, then his current claim required a new explanation. Either the project was worthless then and valuable now, which invalidated his lawsuit, or it had value then, which meant he knowingly misrepresented assets during the divorce. Both paths led to problems. The judge focused on intent. Not emotional intent. Legal intent. Why file this lawsuit now? Why claim ignorance? Why present evidence implying secrecy? The judge reviewed the filing language closely. Words like concealed, hidden, undisclosed. Those weren't neutral terms. They carried accusations. And accusations required proof. The man's lawyer attempted to redirect the focus toward current income levels. Toward fairness. Toward recalculating obligations based on present circumstances. That argument had limits. Child support wasn't about punishing success. It was about responsibility. And current income didn't erase past agreements unless fraud was proven. The judge needed to determine whether this case was about fairness or avoidance. The more the documents were reviewed, the clearer it became. The lawsuit wasn't built on new information. It was built on regret. The ex-husband wasn't reacting to deception. He was reacting to her success. That mattered. The judge moved to the communications submitted as evidence. Old messages, emails, notes. The man had included some to show skepticism about her work. Those backfired. They showed familiarity. They showed involvement. They showed that he had opinions about the project, even if they weren't supportive. He had known what she was working on. He had commented on it. He had dismissed it. Those records contradicted his claim of ignorance. The judge didn't need to say anything yet. The contradiction spoke for itself. The man's posture changed again. This time it wasn't subtle. His shoulders stiffened. His attention drifted. He stopped watching the judge and started watching the paperwork in front of him, as if something there might change. It wouldn't. The court's concern shifted. This was no longer about whether child support should be adjusted. It was about whether the legal system was being used improperly. Bad faith filings weren't taken lightly. Courts tolerated disputes. They didn't tolerate manipulation. The judge reviewed the filing date. It came shortly after a milestone in her business. A public announcement. A visible sign of success. The timing wasn't illegal. But it wasn't neutral either. The judge considered the impact of the lawsuit. Not just for the adults, but for the child. Family court prioritized stability. This case threatened it. The judge began outlining concerns, still without delivering a ruling. The man listened now. Fully. This wasn't the direction he expected. He had imagined a lecture about transparency. A recalculation of numbers. A reduction in payments. Instead, he was facing scrutiny. The ex-wife remained still. Not because she was detached, but because reacting wouldn't help. The facts were doing the work for her. The judge reviewed child support payment history. Consistent. On time. No issues. No evidence of hardship on the payer's side beyond normal frustration. No evidence of financial misconduct on the recipient's side. The judge then examined the request itself. Not just what it asked for, but how it was framed. The language suggested certainty, not suspicion. That mattered. The judge needed to know whether the lawsuit was filed to uncover truth or to force leverage. Everything pointed to the latter. The man had hoped volume would overpower substance. He had hoped embarrassment would replace evidence. He had hoped pressure would produce concessions. Instead, it produced exposure. The judge reached the point where conclusions formed. Not emotional conclusions. Legal ones. The case didn't establish fraud. It didn't establish concealment. It did establish awareness. And it raised concerns about motive. The ex-husband finally understood the shift. This wasn't slipping away. It was flipping. The court had the authority to deny the request and end it there. But the judge wasn't done. Because when someone filed a case alleging deception without evidence, consequences were possible. The judge reviewed statutes related to abuse of process. Cases where the legal system was used to harass, intimidate, or avoid obligations. This case checked several boxes. The ex-husband had accused without proof. He had presented selective information. He had ignored existing records that contradicted his claims. And he had done so to escape a duty tied to his own child. The weight of that realization settled in the room. The man's lawyer stopped organizing papers. There was nothing left to rearrange. The judge prepared to rule. But before doing so, one final confirmation was needed. The judge returned to the original question. The one about timing. The one that started the unraveling. And now, with the full context in place, its significance was clear. By filing this lawsuit, the man had admitted something under oath. That he knew about the project. That he considered it relevant. That he believed it had value. Which contradicted his past statements. That contradiction had consequences. The judge was ready to address them. The judge finally looked up. Not in anger. Not with drama. Just with the kind of focus that tells everyone in the room this part matters. The court had already done the work. The documents were clear. The timelines were aligned. The intent was no longer a mystery. What remained was accountability. The judge summarized the case slowly, but not gently. This was not a situation where new incomes suddenly changed the past. This was not hidden wealth uncovered years later. This was a project that existed openly during the marriage, was discussed during the divorce, and was officially declared to have no value at that time. The man had signed off on that declaration. The judge explained that success after a divorce does not retroactively change asset values. People are allowed to grow. They are allowed to build something slowly. They are allowed to succeed later without owing their former spouse an explanation. That alone would have been enough to deny the lawsuit. But the judge didn't stop there. Because this case wasn't just weak. It was reckless. By filing the lawsuit the way he did, the ex-husband didn't simply ask for a review. He accused his ex-wife of fraud. He claimed deception. He alleged misconduct serious enough to justify court intervention. Those claims weren't supported. And worse, they conflicted with his own past statements. The judge pointed out that by asserting ignorance of the project, he contradicted records showing direct knowledge. By suggesting the project had value during the marriage, he contradicted his own sworn agreement that it was worthless. The court doesn't ignore contradictions like that, especially when they appear strategic. The judge explained what bad faith filing meant in simple terms. It wasn't about losing a case. It was about misusing the court to pressure or punish someone instead of resolving a legitimate dispute. This lawsuit met that definition. The ex-husband tried to adjust in his seat again, but there was nowhere left to move. His lawyer didn't interrupt. There was nothing left to argue. The judge addressed the impact on the child. Child support exists to provide stability, not to reward one parent, not to punish another. When someone attempts to escape that responsibility through false accusations, the court takes it seriously. Very seriously. The judge denied the request to reduce or eliminate child support. That part was immediate. But then came the consequences. The judge ordered a recalculation of past payments, not in his favor, but against him. Because during the time he spent building this case, payments had been delayed under the assumption that a ruling might change things. Those delays now counted. Back child support was assessed. Interest was added. Court costs were assigned to him. And because the filing was deemed abusive, fines were imposed. Not symbolic fines. Real ones. The judge issued a formal warning. Any future attempt to misuse the court system in matters involving the child would result in harsher penalties. The message was clear. This was the last free attempt. The room stayed quiet as the ruling was read. Not because people were shocked, but because it was final. The man didn't argue. He didn't protest. He didn't ask questions. He just sat there, processing the reality that his attempt to escape responsibility had locked it in even tighter. The ex-wife didn't react either. No smile. No relief on her face. Just a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This wasn't about winning. It was about being done. The judge ended by addressing something that hadn't been written in any filing. Respect. The court recognized the effort it takes to build something from nothing, especially while raising a child. Especially while being dismissed by someone who should have supported it. That recognition wasn't emotional. It was factual. The court adjourned. People gathered their papers. The sound of chairs moving filled the room. The man stood up slower than before. The confidence he walked in with was gone. Not replaced with shame, but with something heavier. Regret. He had tried to rewrite history. Instead, he reinforced it. Outside the courtroom, there was no confrontation. No exchange. No closing words. They went their separate ways like two people who no longer had anything left to say. In the weeks that followed, the consequences settled in. Payments resumed, higher than before. Fines were paid. The lawsuit disappeared from discussion as quietly as it had arrived, leaving behind only the lesson it taught. The ex-wife returned to her routine. Parenting. The same schedule as before, but with less fear. She no longer worried that success would be used against her. The court had drawn a clear line. Grow. Thrive. Just do it honestly. The child noticed the change more than anyone else. Life didn't become perfect. It became normal. And sometimes, normal is the best outcome there is. The ex-husband learned something too. Not about business. Not about law. About control. You can't erase responsibility just because you don't like the outcome. You can't punish someone for succeeding after you stopped believing in them. And you can't use a child as leverage without consequences. He sued to escape child support. Instead, he strengthened it. All because he tried to deny something he had acknowledged years earlier. All because one simple question connected the truth. And the court listened.